The court recognizes attorney Victor Hale as lead counsel whose strategy secured today's verdict. The applause began before the judge had even left the courtroom. I stood at the end of the counsel table, one hand resting against a stack of case files that still carried my notes in blue ink. Every cross-examination, every objection, every overnight revision, every risk that had nearly broken me. None of it belonged to me anymore. Victor accepted the congratulations with effortless grace, smiling for the cameras gathering near the courtroom doors. "Our firm has always believed in justice," he said. "Our firm." Not once did he look at me. Not once did he acknowledge that 43 straight days of preparation had been mine. I watched reporters surround him. Flashes of light bounced off polished marble floors. A junior associate squeezed past me and whispered, "Congratulations, Mr. Lawson." For a moment, I almost believed he was speaking to me. Then he hurried toward Victor. "Partner Hale, over here." The congratulations had changed direction before reaching my ears. My phone vibrated. Conference room 9. Immediately. No signature. It didn't need one. Only one person in Whitmore and Cole summoned people without introductions. Managing partner Eleanor Whitmore. Conference room 9 overlooked the city's financial district. Glass walls. Dark oak. A table long enough to seat 20 people. Only 3 chairs were occupied. Eleanor, Victor, and Human Resources Director Melissa Grant. No coffee. No smiles. The atmosphere felt rehearsed. Eleanor folded her hands together. "Sit down, Daniel." I remained standing. "I'd rather hear this standing." Victor sighed dramatically. "Daniel." That tone. The patient voice mentors used when pretending disappointment instead of guilt. Eleanor slid a thin folder across the table. "Over the last several weeks, we've received concerns regarding your conduct." I didn't touch the folder. "What concerns?" "Failure to cooperate. Disruptive communication. Insubordination." I almost laughed. Instead, I asked quietly, "Specific examples?" Melissa opened another file. "There are reports you withheld research materials from senior counsel." I looked at Victor. His expression never changed. That was answer enough. "You mean the research I personally delivered to his office?" Silence. "The witness preparation I completed?" Silence. "The motions filed under his account?" Victor finally spoke. "This isn't productive." "No. You've become emotional." The word landed harder than any accusation. Emotional. 43 days without sleeping properly. 43 days rebuilding a case everyone else considered unwinnable. Emotional. I breathed once. Slowly. Then I understood. This meeting had never been about discovering facts, only recording them. The verdict had already been written, just like today's courtroom victory. "I'll make this simple," Eleanor said. "The firm believes your future would be better elsewhere." There it was. Dismissal. Not because I'd failed, because I'd succeeded. Too visibly. Victor leaned forward. "We're offering 6 months severance. As long as you sign." Melissa produced another document. Non-disparagement. Confidentiality. Waiver of future claims. Prepared days ago. Maybe weeks. So this had started before today's verdict. Long before the applause. Long before the cameras. They had celebrated while already planning my disappearance. I turned another page. Interesting. Very interesting. The separation agreement listed today's victory as having been supervised exclusively by Victor Hale. An unusual detail. Completely unnecessary. Unless someone intended history to become official before anyone questioned it. I finally smiled. Victor noticed. His eyebrows narrowed. "What?" "Nothing. You seem surprisingly calm." "I am." Eleanor interpreted my silence as surrender. "I'm glad you're taking this professionally." Professionally. The irony almost deserved applause. People mistake silence for weakness. They always have. Perhaps because silence doesn't advertise its strength. It simply waits. I reached into my briefcase. Not for evidence. Not for notes. Just my fountain pen. Victor relaxed. He thought he understood what came next. Anger. Negotiation. Threats. Instead, I signed. Every page. Without changing a single word. Melissa blinked. "That was unexpected." Victor smiled. "I knew you'd make the mature decision." I placed the pen carefully beside the contract. I've always believed in making decisions at the right time. Eleanor extended her hand. "No hard feelings." I looked at it, then at her, then collected my briefcase. I wished the firm continued success. Nothing more. No accusations. No speeches. No dramatic exits. I simply walked toward the door. Behind me, Victor laughed quietly. I expected more. So had everyone else. The elevator doors closed. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. My reflection stared back from brushed steel walls. Tired eyes. Loose tie. Sleeves still carrying faint traces of courthouse dust. You really signed. The voice belonged to Olivia Chun, senior paralegal, one of the few people in the building who preferred facts over politics. She had stepped into the elevator seconds before the doors closed. I nodded. I did. They stole your case. I know. They fired you. I know. She frowned. Then why? The elevator descended another floor. Because explaining would require telling her something I wasn't ready to share. Instead, I asked, Olivia, have you ever seen someone celebrate before checking whether the floor beneath them still exists? She looked confused. I don't understand. You will. Outside, evening rain had begun falling across the financial district. Employees hurried beneath umbrellas. Television crews were still interviewing Victor outside the courthouse across the street. He looked confident, untouchable. His face already appeared on business news screens inside nearby cafes. Star litigator delivers landmark corporate victory. Interesting headline, especially since the billing records told another story. I crossed the street without looking back. Not because I was heartbroken, because I had already finished grieving weeks earlier. The moment Victor asked me to upload every research file into the firm's central server under his administrator credentials, he had called it an efficiency measure. Instead, he'd unknowingly handed me something more valuable than recognition. A record. Digital systems remembered what ambitious people preferred to erase. Every upload, every revision, every author, every timestamp. Invisible, patient, permanent. I had noticed. I had said nothing. My apartment wasn't large, just clean, quiet, intentional. No expensive artwork, no luxury furniture. The dining table was covered with legal journals, financial reports, and a whiteboard leaning against the wall. Most people would have mistaken it for clutter. It wasn't. It was construction. I hung my jacket by the door and opened my laptop. The screen woke instantly. A secure folder appeared. Inside sat dozens of files. Metadata reports. Archived emails. Billing discrepancies. Internal authorization logs. Nothing stolen. Nothing hacked. Everything obtained legally through routine work that no one else had bothered to understand. Law firms trusted paperwork. I trusted systems. Systems had memories. People had egos. Egos erased themselves. I opened one spreadsheet. Hours billed. Authors. Approval chains. Small inconsistencies repeated hundreds of times. One mistake alone meant nothing. Hundreds formed a pattern. Patterns became questions. Questions invited audits. I closed the file again. Not yet. A notification appeared. Incoming call, Marcus Reed. Marcus had left Whitmore and Cole nearly a year ago. Everyone believed he'd accepted an in-house counsel position because of higher pay. That wasn't true. He had seen something. Something that convinced him leaving was healthier than winning. I answered. You watched the news? He asked. I lived it. They fired you. They did. A pause. Then quietly. So, is it finally time? I looked toward the rain sliding down the apartment window. Lights from surrounding towers blurred into soft gold streaks. For weeks, I'd asked myself the same question. Not whether they would betray me. That answer had arrived long ago. The real question had been whether I was prepared to walk away without trying to save a place that had already chosen corruption over integrity. Tonight, the answer felt surprisingly simple. Yes, I said. Marcus didn't ask another question. He only replied, I've kept the office ready. For the first time that day, I smiled. Not because Victor had lost. He hadn't. Not yet. But because I had finally stopped trying to protect people who believed they were entitled to everything I built. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't exposing the lie. It's quietly stepping aside and letting the lie stand on its own. The line went silent after Marcus ended the call. I remained standing by the window, watching the rain wash streaks of reflected neon across the glass. Somewhere downtown, Victor Hale was still giving interviews. By tomorrow morning, his photograph would be on legal websites, business magazines, and the firm's own homepage. He would be celebrated. For now, I set my phone on the table and opened another folder. Not evidence. Blueprints. Floor plans. Lease agreements. Projected operating costs. A business license application that had been approved 3 weeks earlier. Marcus hadn't been exaggerating. The office was ready. I had simply hoped I would never need it. For years, I believed loyalty could repair a broken institution. Every late night, every weekend sacrificed, every impossible deadline accepted, I had convinced myself I was investing in something larger than my career. Tonight, I finally admitted the truth. I had been maintaining a machine that rewarded ambition without integrity. The moment I accepted that, an unexpected calm settled over me. The next morning, the city buzzed with one story. Whitmore and Cole secures record corporate verdict. Televisions and cafes replayed Victor's interview. Employees entering office buildings repeated his remarks as though they had witnessed history. No one mentioned the associate who had disappeared immediately afterward. That suited me. My phone vibrated repeatedly. Former classmates, clients, even opposing counsel. Most had seen the news. Few knew what had happened behind closed doors. I ignored nearly all of them. Only one message caught my attention. Olivia Chun, we need to talk. Not at the firm. I replied with the address of a quiet coffee shop 2 blocks from the courthouse. Olivia arrived carrying 2 paper folders. She looked exhausted. You shouldn't have come here, I said. I know. She sat across from me. They're already rewriting everything. I wasn't surprised. They've removed your name from the internal case archive. I stirred my coffee without drinking it. They changed the authorship records overnight. That made me look up. Changed. She nodded. I checked before IT restricted access. They replaced your drafts with copies under Victor's profile. Interesting. Not frightening. Just interesting. Because digital records rarely disappeared. People only believed they did. Olivia leaned forward. Daniel, I copied something before they locked everything. She slid one folder across the table. Inside were printed screenshots, server logs, modification histories, administrative overrides. Someone had been working long after the verdict. Someone in a hurry. I closed the folder. You kept these? I thought you'd need them. I looked at her for several seconds. Why? Her answer came without hesitation. Because I watched you build that case. Silence settled between us. Sometimes trust wasn't earned through dramatic gestures. Sometimes it was earned because someone had quietly watched another person tell the truth every single day. Don't use these, I said. Olivia blinked. What? Not yet. She frowned. They're destroying evidence. No. They're creating it. Confusion crossed her face. They're changing records. Exactly. The more they alter, the more they have to explain later. She stared at me. You've already thought this through. I smiled faintly. I've had time. She exhaled slowly. So what happens now? I build something new. And Victor? I folded the papers neatly before returning them. He'll make his own decisions. You really aren't going after him? I don't need to. That answer seemed to trouble her more than anger would have. People expected revenge to be loud. They rarely understood that consequences had remarkable patience. By noon, I stood inside an office building 15 blocks from Whitmore and Cole. The lobby smelled of fresh paint and polished stone. The receptionist recognized Marcus immediately. Good morning, Mr. Reed. He smiled. Our third partner is finally here. Third partner. The words sounded unfamiliar. Not because they were unrealistic. Because no one had called me an equal in years. Marcus led me upstairs. The office occupied half of an entire floor. Nothing extravagant. Simple glass offices. A modest conference room. Shelves waiting for books. Walls still empty. It isn't much, Marcus admitted. It doesn't need to be. I walked slowly through the space. Every room represented something I had almost forgotten. Choice. No portraits of founding partners watching from the walls. No hierarchy disguised as tradition. No politics pretending to be mentorship. Marcus handed me a small brass key. I wasn't sure you'd accept. I almost didn't. What changed? I looked around once more. They fired the wrong person. Marcus laughed. That's the first arrogant thing I've heard you say. It isn't arrogance. What is it? Observation. The office wasn't empty. A young woman stood near the conference room assembling bookshelves. She looked up. You're finally here. Marcus gestured toward her. Sophia Lynn. Our operations manager. She extended her hand. I've heard about you. I hope only good things. She smiled. Depends who was talking. There was honesty in her tone. I appreciated that. Marcus disappeared to answer a phone call, leaving the two of us alone. Sophia continued organizing legal reference books. You know everyone's talking about yesterday. I assumed they would. They think you'll sue. I won't. They think you'll give interviews. I won't. She placed another book on the shelf. So what will you do? I answered without looking away from the window. Work. She laughed softly. I was hoping you'd say that. Late that afternoon, Marcus called an informal meeting. There were only 5 of us. Marcus, Sophia, a retired litigation consultant named Harold Bennett, a young associate called Ethan Wu, and me. No speeches. No motivational slogans. Marcus simply placed a blank legal pad in the center of the conference table. What kind of firm are we building? No one answered immediately. Harold finally spoke. One that bills honestly. Sophia added. One where associates receive credit. Ethan smiled nervously. One where people aren't afraid to ask questions. Marcus looked toward me. And you? I stared at the empty page. Then wrote 6 words. Truth shouldn't require courage inside law. No one spoke. Harold nodded first. I'll stay. Sophia followed. So will I. Ethan looked around the room. I've never worked anywhere else. Marcus smiled. You have now. At almost the same moment. Across the city, Victor Hale entered the executive conference room at Whitmore & Cole. The applause was louder than before. Champagne waited on ice. Junior partners congratulated him. Eleanor Whitmore raised her glass. To our newest face of the firm. Victor accepted every compliment with practiced confidence. But halfway through the celebration, the firm's chief financial officer quietly entered the room. He wasn't smiling. Eleanor. She frowned. We're in the middle of something. It can't wait. He handed her a sealed envelope. She opened it. Read one page. Then another. The color slowly disappeared from her face. Victor noticed immediately. What happened? She folded the documents before anyone else could read them. It's nothing. The CFO disagreed. It isn't nothing. The external compliance team has requested access to the litigation billing records. The room became noticeably quieter. Victor forced a laugh. Routine review. No. The CFO's voice remained calm. They specifically requested files related to yesterday's case. Victor's smile stiffened. Why? No explanation. No one in that room knew the answer. Not yet. Miles away, I didn't know the audit request had already arrived. I hadn't submitted anything. Neither had Marcus. Neither had Olivia. Sometimes systems noticed inconsistencies long before people admitted they existed. And once those systems began asking questions, no speech, no reputation, no celebrated victory, could make the numbers tell a different story. I closed the office lights and looked back one final time before locking the door. A chapter had ended. Another had begun. I didn't know how long it would take for the truth to surface. Days. Weeks. Perhaps longer. It didn't matter. Truth wasn't fast. It was patient. And patience had always been my greatest advantage. The people who demand unquestioning loyalty are often the first to abandon it when honesty becomes inconvenient. I turned the key, then walked into the evening without looking back. The first client who called wasn't looking for justice. He was looking for certainty. Marcus placed the call on speaker inside our unfinished conference room. Cardboard boxes still lined one wall, and half the bookshelves remained empty. We didn't even have our firm's name mounted outside the office yet. Mr. Lawson, the voice said cautiously, I heard rumors. Rumors usually travel faster than facts. A hesitant laugh. They're saying Whitmore & Cole dismissed you for misconduct. Marcus glanced at me, but remained silent. And what do you think? I asked. I've worked with you for 6 years. Then trust what you've seen. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked the question that actually mattered. If I move my company's litigation to your new firm, will you still handle it personally? Yes. Another pause. I'll have my legal department contact you this afternoon. The line disconnected. Marcus leaned back in his chair. First client. I shook my head. No. What do you mean? He isn't here because they failed. He's here because we earned his trust before any of this happened. There was a difference. A very important one. Businesses could advertise. Trust couldn't. By noon, the office felt alive. Sophia had transformed empty desks into workstations. Ethan organized case files with an enthusiasm that reminded me of my first year in practice, before ambition had become a currency inside Whitmore & Cole. Harold reviewed every draft that crossed his desk with the patience of a man who had spent 40 years watching lawyers confuse confidence with competence. For the first time in years, no one was pretending. There were no carefully rehearsed conversations whenever a partner walked by. No whispered politics. No competition disguised as teamwork. Just work. Real work. I hadn't realized how exhausting pretense had become until it disappeared. Sophia knocked lightly on my office door. "We have visitors." I looked up from the contract I was reviewing. "Clients." She smiled. "Worse." I followed her into reception. Two familiar faces stood near the entrance. James Porter, Rachel Dunn, both senior associates from Whitmore and Cole. James forced an awkward smile. "Daniel." "James." Rachel folded her arms. "You left without saying goodbye. I signed a separation agreement. You could have called." I don't think anyone wanted that conversation. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Finally, James cleared his throat. "Eleanor sent us." Of course she had. Marcus quietly disappeared into another office, leaving the conversation to me. "What does she want?" James hesitated. "She hopes you'll reconsider." I almost laughed. "Reconsider what?" "The resignation." I didn't resign. Rachel looked away. "The dismissal." "There it is." James sighed. "Look, things happened quickly." They certainly did. Eleanor believes emotions influenced the decision. No. I met his eyes. Preparation influenced the decision. Neither of them understood. Not yet. Rachel stepped forward. "Victor is willing to discuss a new partnership track. A week ago I wasn't worthy of staying. Things changed." "No." They became inconvenient. James lowered his voice. "The audit has everyone nervous." Interesting. So word had already spread internally. I kept my expression neutral. "What audit?" Rachel answered too quickly. "Nothing serious." I simply waited. Silence often encouraged people to explain more than questions ever could. James rubbed the back of his neck. "The compliance team requested additional financial records." "Routine." "No one knows." I nodded slowly. "I'm sure the firm will cooperate." Rachel studied me carefully. "You really don't know?" "Know what?" She seemed disappointed, almost as though she expected me to admit something. "Anything." Instead I asked, "Did Eleanor send you here to bring me back, or to find out what I have?" Neither answered. That was answer enough. After they left, Marcus closed the reception door. "They're scared." "They should be." "You still haven't told me." "Told you what?" "How much evidence you actually have." I looked toward the city skyline beyond the office windows. "I have enough." "Enough for what?" "To protect myself." Marcus frowned. "And Victor?" "He'll decide the rest." Sometimes people misunderstood preparation. Preparation wasn't collecting weapons. It was making sure you didn't become someone else's victim. Everything beyond that belonged to consequences. Across the city, Victor Hale sat inside Eleanor Whitmore's office. She placed a printed report on the desk. "Our billing department found irregularities." Victor barely glanced at it. "Minor clerical errors." "Are they?" He shifted in his chair. "Eleanor." "Don't." Her voice remained calm. "The compliance auditors requested access before we corrected anything." Victor's confidence faltered for the first time. "Who reported us?" "No one knows." He immediately answered. "Daniel." "You have proof?" "No." "Then stop saying his name." Victor clenched his jaw. "He planned this." Eleanor leaned back. "Did he?" He left too calmly. She considered that. "So your evidence is his attitude." Victor didn't respond. For the first time since the verdict, certainty had begun slipping away. Back at our office, Ethan entered carrying a newspaper. He looked both excited and embarrassed. "You should probably see this." The business section displayed Victor's photograph across half the front page. "Legal star leads historic win." Below it, a smaller article caught my attention. "Regional Compliance Authority expands financial oversight of major law firms." Most readers would overlook it. I didn't. Neither did Marcus. "They're moving quickly." I folded the newspaper. "No. They've probably been investigating for months." People liked believing disasters happened overnight. In reality, collapse usually began with small compromises no one considered dangerous. One altered invoice. One false signature. One stolen piece of credit. By the time the building visibly cracked, its foundation had already failed. Sophia appeared in my doorway again. "This one isn't a client." She handed me a sealed envelope. No return address. Inside was a single flash drive. Nothing else. Marcus looked over my shoulder. "No note." I shook my head. Harold adjusted his glasses. "Open it on an isolated machine." We did. The drive contained only one folder. Executive expense approvals. Hundreds of files. Scanned receipts. Internal authorizations. Travel reimbursements. Some ordinary. Some very unusual. Sophia slowly read one document. Why would litigation expenses be billed to client trust accounts? Harold's expression hardened. They shouldn't. Marcus looked toward me. Did you know about this? I suspected poor controls. This is more than poor controls. I nodded. Yes. It was. But something bothered me. Very few people inside Whitmore and Cole could access these records. Whoever had sent this was still inside the firm, watching, waiting, helping, or perhaps protecting themselves before everything collapsed. I closed the folder. No one copies these. Marcus looked surprised. Not yet. Not yet. He understood immediately. If someone inside had risked everything to send the files, they might need to do it again. And frightened people rarely trusted those who moved too quickly. Sometimes the strongest response was doing absolutely nothing. At least for now. The flash drive remained locked inside my desk. Marcus looked at it twice before finally asking the question he had been holding back all afternoon. You're really not going to use it? I closed the drawer. No. It could destroy them. It could also destroy the person who sent it. He frowned. You always think 2 moves ahead. I think about consequences. There was a difference. The evidence wasn't going anywhere. The person who had risked everything to deliver it still had to wake up tomorrow morning and walk back into Whitmore and Cole. If I rushed, they would become collateral damage. That wasn't justice. That was impatience. Business came slowly. Exactly as I expected. A new firm didn't earn trust overnight. Every client meeting felt less like a negotiation and more like an interview. Not for them. For us. Late that afternoon, representatives from a mid-sized manufacturing company arrived. The company's CEO, Mr. Adrian Foster, carried a folder nearly 2 inches thick. He didn't sit immediately. I've heard good things about you. I appreciate that. I've also heard you were dismissed. I was. He nodded. I prefer direct answers. So do I. He finally took a seat. Why should I trust someone whose own firm let him go? Marcus remained silent. This wasn't his conversation. It depends, I answered calmly. On what? Do you believe every company tells the truth when someone leaves? Mr. Foster studied me for several seconds. No, neither do I. He smiled for the first time. Fair enough. He opened the folder. My previous attorneys stopped listening 6 months ago. We talked for almost 2 hours. Not once did I mention Whitmore and Cole. Not once did I criticize Victor. By the time Mr. Foster stood to leave, he extended his hand without hesitation. My company will be transferring its litigation portfolio. After he left, Ethan looked genuinely amazed. You never defended yourself. There was nothing to defend. But he asked why they fired you. He asked whether I deserved his trust. Ethan blinked. Those aren't the same question. No, they never are. Across town, Whitmore and Cole wasn't enjoying the same quiet confidence. The compliance auditors had arrived. 3 people. Dark suits. No wasted movement. No unnecessary conversation. They requested access to financial records, litigation billing, and internal approval chains. Victor watched from the end of the hallway as IT employees escorted the auditors toward the records department. Rachel happened to pass by. They're serious. Victor forced a smile. Routine. Rachel didn't answer. She had worked at the firm long enough to recognize fear when she saw it. Inside Eleanor Whitmore's office, the atmosphere had changed completely. No champagne. No congratulations. Only stacks of documents. The chief financial officer adjusted his glasses. There are discrepancies. Eleanor remained composed. How serious? We don't know yet. Can they be explained? Some. And the rest? He hesitated. I honestly don't know. Victor stepped forward. This is being exaggerated. The CFO turned toward him. Mr. Hale. Yes. Did you personally approve these litigation expense transfers? Victor glanced at the paperwork. I signed whatever accounting placed in front of me. The room fell silent. Even he seemed to realize what he'd just admitted. Meanwhile, our office continued growing. Not rapidly. Steadily. Sophia insisted on interviewing every potential employee personally. We don't need the smartest people. Marcus laughed. In a law firm? We need the right people. I watched quietly as she rejected applicants with impressive resumes because they treated receptionists with impatience or interrupted junior staff during interviews. When Marcus questioned one decision, she answered simply, character scales better than talent. No one argued. Near sunset, Olivia called. Her voice sounded strained. They're searching everyone's computers. I closed the file I had been reviewing. Because of the audit? Yes. They're checking email histories. Were you questioned? She laughed without humor. For almost an hour. What did they ask? If I'd shared internal documents. And I told them the truth. You hadn't. I hadn't. Neither of us mentioned the printed server logs she'd shown me days earlier. Those weren't firm property anymore. She had made those copies before any investigation existed. Sometimes timing mattered as much as action. Daniel, there was something different in her voice. They're looking for a traitor. They won't find one. They think someone is helping you. I stared out the office window. The city lights had begun appearing one by one. I'm not asking anyone to help me. I know. Another pause. But someone is. After the call ended, Marcus entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. Olivia. I nodded. They're panicking. He handed me a cup. Good. No. He looked surprised. Panic makes people careless. Isn't that what we want? I shook my head. I don't want anyone cornered. Marcus sighed. Daniel, you're still trying to protect them. I'm protecting the people who aren't guilty. There was another difference many people failed to understand. Organizations weren't evil. People made choices. Some lied. Some remained honest. Justice that ignored that distinction eventually became another form of injustice. The following morning, Harold walked into my office carrying a thin folder. I've finished reviewing the anonymous flash drive. And he placed a handwritten note on my desk. They're not just manipulating billing. I read his observations carefully. Client trust accounts, expense reallocations, approval mismatches, hidden write-offs. Each irregularity by itself could have been explained. Together, they formed something much larger. Harold folded his arms. Whoever built this system understood audits. You think it was intentional? I think someone designed it to survive casual inspection. I nodded slowly, but not a determined one. He smiled. Exactly. That afternoon, Ethan rushed into the conference room. You need to see this. He turned a tablet toward us. A breaking business report filled the screen. Whitmore and Cole announces internal review following regulatory inquiry. Marcus raised an eyebrow. They're trying to control the narrative. Sophia crossed her arms. They're already behind. I quietly read the firm's public statement. It blamed administrative inconsistencies, promised full cooperation, expressed complete confidence in senior leadership. One sentence stood out. Our lead litigation partner, Victor Hale, remains fully responsible for the firm's recent legal successes. Marcus noticed my expression. What? They just made a mistake. How? They officially attached everything to one person. He stared at the statement again, then slowly smiled. Oh, the same publicity Victor had welcomed after the courtroom victory was quietly becoming a chain around his own neck. No one had forced Whitmore and Cole to make him the face of every success. They had chosen it. Now every question from regulators, every document, every signature, would naturally lead back to the person they themselves had elevated. I closed the tablet. There was nothing to celebrate. Not yet. Collapse rarely happened all at once. It happened in stages. First came confidence, then denial, then blame. Finally, truth. Outside our office, the city moved through another ordinary evening. Traffic flowed. Restaurants filled. Office lights blinked on across the skyline. Most people would never know that inside one of the city's most prestigious law firms, the foundation had already begun to crack, and no one could stop it by pretending it was still standing. Every act of rescue teaches someone they never need to save themselves. I turned off my office light, leaving the flash drive untouched inside the locked drawer. For now, waiting remained the strongest move I could make. The first subpoena didn't arrive at Whitmore and Cole with flashing lights or television cameras. It arrived in a plain white envelope. The receptionist signed for it without a second thought. By the time it reached Eleanor Whitmore's office, half the building had already noticed the unusual delivery. No one said anything, but conversations became quieter. Doors stayed closed a little longer. Even the elevators seemed unusually silent. I learned about the subpoena from the morning news. Not because the reporters knew what it contained. They didn't. They only knew that regulators had expanded their inquiry into several high-value corporate cases handled by prominent firms across the city. Whitmore and Cole wasn't named. Not yet. Marcus set his coffee beside my desk. You've been staring at that article for 5 minutes. I'm thinking. Dangerous habit. It usually is. He pulled out a chair. They're getting closer. I know. You still don't look happy. I folded the newspaper. I don't want them to fall. Marcus frowned. You don't. I want the truth to stand. There is a difference. He considered that for a long moment before nodding. You really mean that? I do. If the investigation proved the firm had acted honestly, I would accept it. If it proved otherwise, the consequences belonged to those who had made those choices. I wasn't waiting for revenge. I was waiting for certainty. Our receptionist knocked gently on my office door. Mr. Lawson? Come in. A woman insists on speaking with you. Did she leave a name? She said you'll recognize it. A moment later, a woman in her late 50s stepped inside. Elegant gray suit. Silver hair. Calm eyes that missed very little. I stood immediately. Judge Morrison. She smiled. It's been a while. Retired Judge Evelyn Morrison had presided over my very first trial years earlier. She was also one of the few people who had once told me something I'd never forgotten. Your reputation is built long before people begin talking about it. What brings you here? I asked. I heard you opened your own practice. I did. And I heard why. I imagine you've heard several versions. She smiled knowingly. I have. Neither of us mentioned Whitmore and Cole. Instead, she placed a slim folder on my desk. I'm joining a legal ethics commission as an independent advisor. I looked at the folder, but didn't open it. I thought you should know. Why tell me? Because your name came up. My expression remained unchanged. In what context? She held my gaze. Someone suggested you might have valuable information. And what did you say? I said that if Daniel Lawson possessed evidence, he wouldn't leak it to destroy someone. She paused. He would wait until telling the truth protected the innocent as well. I couldn't hide my surprise. You have a high opinion of me. No. She stood. I've simply watched your career. Before leaving, she stopped beside the door. Be careful. About what? People who panic stop distinguishing between enemies and witnesses. The door closed softly behind her. Marcus entered a moment later. You look like you've just seen a ghost. In a way. I glanced at the unopened folder. I saw a mirror. Across town, Victor Hale wasn't sleeping. His office lights remained on long after midnight. Stacks of billing reports covered his desk. He flipped through page after page, searching for reassurance. Instead, he found inconsistencies he had never bothered to notice before. A knock interrupted him. Rachel stepped inside. You should go home. I'm busy. You've been here 14 hours. I'm reviewing records. She hesitated. Victor, what? Did you actually check these before signing them? He looked up sharply. What are you implying? I'm asking. His silence answered more than words could. Rachel slowly closed the office door. When she left, Victor stared at the signature on another approval form. His own. He honestly couldn't remember signing it. There had been hundreds, maybe thousands. He had trusted accounting, trusted administration, trusted the system. For the first time, he wondered whether he had ever truly known how the system worked. Back at our office, Ethan burst into the conference room, carrying his laptop. Daniel. I looked up. You should see this. He projected a legal industry forum onto the screen. Anonymous discussions filled the page. Whitmore and Cole under investigation. Senior partners denying internal problems. Associates quietly updating resumes. Sophia sighed. Rumors. Harold shook his head. No. They're symptoms. He looked toward the younger lawyers. When good people start leaving quietly, pay attention. No one argued. That afternoon, our smallest client taught me the biggest lesson of the week. Mrs. Elena Brooks owned a neighborhood bookstore. Her dispute involved nothing more dramatic than a lease disagreement. Financially, the case was insignificant. She apologized twice before explaining her situation. I'm sorry to waste your time. I smiled. You're not. My case isn't important. It is to you. Her shoulders relaxed. An hour later, she left my office with a clear legal strategy and a smile that hadn't been there when she arrived. Ethan watched from the hallway. You spent more time with her than with our largest corporate client. I did. Why? Because she believed she mattered less. He nodded slowly. And she doesn't. No client does. When the office became quiet again, Harold walked beside me. You're building something different. I'm trying. He smiled. Keep trying. Near closing time, Olivia appeared without calling ahead. She looked exhausted. Dark circles framed her eyes. You shouldn't be here, I said. I know. She closed the office door behind her. They suspended 2 people today. For what? Unauthorized database access. My expression hardened. Were they involved? No. They were convenient. Silence filled the room. They're trying to show the auditors they're taking action, she continued. They needed someone to blame. I understood immediately. Real investigations often created desperate decisions. And desperate decisions almost always harm the wrong people first. Olivia reached into her bag. I didn't bring documents. I wasn't expecting any. I brought names. She handed me a folded sheet of paper. Not evidence. Just a handwritten list. Employees. Support staff. Junior accountants. People she believed were honest. People now terrified of losing their jobs because senior leadership refused to admit mistakes. I looked at the list for several moments before folding it carefully. I'll remember them. She searched my face. That's all. What else should I do? Fight. I shook my head gently. Not yet. Her frustration was obvious. They're hurting innocent people. I know. And you're waiting. Yes. She looked away. I don't know if I could. I answered quietly. Neither could I a year ago. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside Whitmore and Cole, the pressure continued building behind polished walls. Inside our office, we kept working. One firm was trying to protect its image. The other was trying to earn its future. Neither journey was loud, but only one of them was built on solid ground. The rain began just before sunrise. Not the dramatic kind that flooded streets or rattled windows. Just a steady rain. The kind that quietly revealed every leak a building already had. I watched it from my office window while reviewing our newest case files. Sophia knocked once before stepping inside. Someone's here to see you. No appointment. She shook her head. He says you'll remember him. A few moments later, the office door opened. I recognized him immediately. Thomas Grayson, former head of Whitmore and Cole's records department. He had retired 6 months earlier after nearly 30 years with the firm. Most lawyers barely knew his name. That was because records clerks weren't remembered. Only their work was. He smiled faintly. You've lost weight. So have you. He laughed. I suppose stress does that. I invited him to sit. What brings you here? He looked around my office before answering. It's quieter than I expected. We're still growing. That's probably a good thing. He rested both hands on his cane. I heard what happened. I imagine everyone has. I didn't come to talk about that. His eyes settled on mine. I came because I remembered something. Thomas spoke slowly, carefully. Years of handling confidential records had made him a man who chose every word with precision. Do you remember asking me a strange question 2 years ago? I searched my memory. Then it returned. I asked whether archived server logs could ever truly disappear. He nodded. And do you remember my answer? I smiled. Files can be deleted. Histories are much harder to erase. Thomas leaned back. You were the only lawyer who ever asked. Most attorneys assumed documents simply existed. Very few wondered how they continued existing. Thomas reached into his briefcase. He removed a worn notebook. Not firm property. His own. I kept personal notes. My expression sharpened. About what? System upgrades. Archive migrations. Retention schedules. He slid the notebook across the desk. I thought someone might eventually need to understand how the records were stored. I opened it carefully. Dates. Software changes. Backup procedures. Nothing confidential. Nothing illegal. Just meticulous observations from a man who believed details mattered. Marcus entered quietly, stopping when he saw Thomas. I didn't realize we had company. Thomas stood and offered a handshake. Thomas Grayson. Marcus's eyes widened. The records director? The retired records director. Marcus looked at the notebook. You kept all this. Thomas smiled. I trusted systems. He glanced toward me. I learned that from him. After Thomas left, Marcus closed the office door. This changes things. I shook my head. No. It explains things. He frowned. What's the difference? Evidence tells us what happened. Understanding tells us why. The notebook didn't expose anyone. It simply explained something I had suspected all along. Digital records weren't disappearing. Someone had been trying to rewrite them. Those weren't the same thing. Meanwhile, inside Whitmore and Cole, the atmosphere had shifted from nervousness to suspicion. Conversations stopped whenever someone entered a room. Department heads requested written confirmations for routine approvals. Employees who had once eaten lunch together now sat alone. Victor noticed all of it. He hated all of it. This is getting ridiculous, he snapped during a meeting. Eleanor didn't respond immediately. She was reading another report. Finally, she looked up. The auditors want additional access. Victor rubbed his forehead. They already have everything. No. They want archived server histories. The room became perfectly still. Victor slowly looked toward the IT director. You told me those logs were overwritten. The IT director blinked. I never said that. You said old records weren't retained. I said inactive files were compressed. They're different things. Victor's face drained of color. For the first time, he realized he had misunderstood how the firm's own systems worked. That afternoon, Olivia called again. This time her voice sounded calmer. They questioned me again. What changed? They're asking better questions. I understood immediately. Investigations often began broadly. Eventually, they became precise. What did they ask? Who prepared the Morrison Technologies case? I remained silent. And I answered honestly. She paused. I said you did. The words hung between us. They asked why Victor received public credit. And I told them I wasn't in partner meetings. I smiled faintly. The truth. The truth. Neither more nor less. As evening approached, Harold asked everyone to gather in the conference room. He rarely interrupted work without reason. I've been thinking, he began. No one spoke. When organizations collapse, he wrote 2 words on the whiteboard. Error. Choice. They're not the same. He circled the first word. Errors deserve correction. Then the second. Choices deserve accountability. He turned toward Ethan. If someone signs a document without reading it. Error. Maybe. He looked toward Sophia. If someone knowingly takes credit for another person's work. Choice. Harold nodded. And if someone keeps doing it. No one answered. Because everyone already knew. Patterns weren't accidents. They were habits. The office had emptied by the time I finally looked through the anonymous flash drive again. Not to search for something new. To understand what I already had. I noticed a reimbursement form. Ordinary. Then another. Approved by Victor. A third. Approved by Eleanor. Each one alone meant nothing. Together they revealed something subtle. Authority had become routine. No one questioned signatures anymore. People trusted titles. Titles replaced scrutiny. That realization unsettled me more than any document. Corruption rarely began with greed. It began when people stopped paying attention. I locked the drive away once more. Still not the right time. Before leaving for the night, Sophia knocked gently on my office door. I've been meaning to ask you something. Go ahead. When they fired you. Yes. Were you scared? I looked around the office. The shelves. The case files. The lights still burning in the workspaces where our team had spent another honest day building something together. Very. She looked surprised. You didn't seem scared. I was. So why were you so calm? I smiled. Because fear doesn't make better decisions. She stood quietly for a moment before nodding. I think everyone needed to hear that. After she left, I turned off the lights one by one. Across the city, Whitmore and Cole remained illuminated long into the night. Meetings continued. Excuses multiplied. Pressure increased. No one there realized that the investigation was no longer being driven by anonymous rumors or hidden documents. It was being driven by something far more dangerous. Their own decisions. Every attempt to rewrite the past had created another record. Every effort to protect a lie had produced another witness. And sometimes, the most powerful witnesses weren't people at all. They were the footprints left behind by those who believed no one was watching. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is nothing. I locked the office behind me and stepped into the cool evening air. For the first time since leaving Whitmore and Cole, I no longer wondered whether the truth would emerge. I only wondered who would recognize it first. The first headline didn't accuse anyone. It asked a question. Regulators expand review of billing practices at prominent law firm. No names. No photographs. No dramatic language. Just a carefully written article buried halfway down the business section. Most readers turned the page without noticing it. People inside Whitmore and Cole did not. By 8 o'clock that morning, every partner had already read it. By 9, no one trusted the silence in the hallways. I folded the newspaper and placed it beside my coffee. Marcus looked over from across the conference table. They finally made the news. They made the business section. For now, he wasn't wrong. Public scandals rarely began with explosive headlines. They began with restrained reporting, cautious wording, and unanswered questions. The louder headlines only came later, after the evidence had nowhere left to hide. Sophia entered carrying the day's schedule. You've got 3 client meetings. Any emergencies? She shook her head. Just one interesting phone call. Who? Eleanor Whitmore. The room fell quiet. Marcus slowly raised an eyebrow. And I told her you were unavailable. You didn't ask me first. No. She smiled slightly. I already knew your answer. Eleanor called again an hour later. This time I answered. There was no greeting, only a measured silence. Finally she spoke. Daniel. Eleanor. I'd like to meet. Why? I think we should discuss recent developments. I don't think there's anything for us to discuss. Please. The single word surprised me. Not because it sounded desperate. Because it sounded tired. I won't discuss the investigation, I said. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking? Another pause. I want to understand. I looked through the glass wall of my office. Ethan was helping a client review documents. Sophia was laughing quietly with the receptionist. Marcus was explaining strategy to Harold over a whiteboard covered in handwritten notes. For years, I had imagined conversations like this. Not as opportunities for revenge, as opportunities for honesty. Now that one had arrived, it felt strangely unimportant. We can meet, I said calmly, but not to negotiate. The restaurant Eleanor chose overlooked the river. It was elegant without trying to impress. Years ago, she'd brought me there after my first successful trial. She had raised a glass and told me, the law remembers those who stay loyal. Today neither of us ordered wine. She looked older than I remembered. Not physically, emotionally. The confidence that had once defined her seemed weighed down by something she could no longer hide. You've built something impressive, she said. We're building. I underestimated you. No, you misunderstood me. She looked down at her untouched tea. I thought you wanted partnership. I wanted fairness. There's a difference. I know that now. Neither of us spoke for several moments. The waiter quietly refilled our cups before leaving again. Finally, Eleanor asked the question she'd been carrying since the day I walked out of Whitmore and Cole. Did you know this would happen? I answered carefully. I knew actions leave records. No. She held my gaze. I mean, did you know we'd be investigated? No. Her shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. I believed that if enough questions were ignored, I continued quietly, someone would eventually ask them. Eleanor studied my face. I've replayed that meeting in conference room 900 times. So have I. You never argued. There was nothing left to argue. You smiled. I did. Why? Because I had finally accepted something that had taken years to understand. You believed I smiled because I had a plan. She didn't deny it. I smiled because I stopped asking people to become who they had already chosen not to be. The words settled heavily between us. Outside, the river flowed past the restaurant windows, indifferent to careers, reputations, and titles. I failed you, Eleanor admitted. I looked at her quietly. No. She frowned. I failed the standards I claimed to lead. For the first time since I'd known her. She wasn't protecting herself. She was telling the truth. Back at Whitmore and Cole, Victor Hale wasn't finding the same peace. The auditors had requested another round of interviews. This time they wanted individual meetings. No partners present. No shared legal counsel. No group statements. Each person would answer alone. Rachel emerged from her interview looking pale. James followed 20 minutes later. Neither spoke. Victor intercepted James near the elevators. What did they ask? James hesitated. Normal questions. What questions? They wanted to know how cases were assigned. Victor's expression tightened. And I told them. What exactly? The truth. Victor grabbed his arm. James. James gently pulled free. I'm not lying to investigators. Victor watched him walk away. For the first time, he noticed how many employees avoided making eye contact with him. Not because they hated him, because they were afraid. That afternoon, our office welcomed another new client. Unlike the others, she wasn't seeking legal representation. She was seeking advice. Professor Linda Zhao taught legal ethics at the city's largest university. I've been following your firm's work. We've only been open a short time. Sometimes that's enough. She smiled warmly. I'd like to invite you to lecture my final year students. I looked genuinely surprised. I'm probably the last lawyer making headlines you should invite. That's exactly why I invited you. She opened a notebook. My students know how to win cases. She looked directly at me. They don't yet know how to lose a career without losing themselves. The sentence stayed with me long after she left. Near sunset, Olivia arrived unexpectedly. She didn't sit. They're blaming Victor. I wasn't surprised. They've stopped defending him. She nodded. Eleanor hasn't said it publicly, but internally, everyone's acting like this was his operation. I looked out toward the city. No. What? It wasn't. She frowned. He signed the approvals. Yes. He took credit. Yes. So why defend him? I'm not. I turned back toward her. I'm refusing to simplify the truth. People wanted villains because villains made stories easier. Reality rarely offered that convenience. Victor had made choices. Serious ones. But systems had encouraged those choices. Leaders had rewarded them. Silence had protected them. Responsibility didn't belong to one man alone. Olivia slowly nodded. I think that's why people trust you. Why? Because you don't change the truth just because it would make a better story. She left a few minutes later. As the office emptied for the evening, I remained alone, looking across the skyline. Across the river, Whitmore and Cole's Tower still dominated the city's legal district. From this distance it looked as impressive as ever. Glass reflected the setting sun. Lights glowed across dozens of floors. No cracks. No signs of collapse. Appearances had always been its greatest strength. But appearances weren't foundations. And once the foundation began to fail, even the brightest tower could not remain standing forever. The summons arrived just after sunrise. Not for me. For Whitmore and Cole's executive committee. By mid-morning, black sedans lined the curb outside the firm's headquarters. Reporters hadn't gathered yet. The investigation was still too quiet for that. But inside the building, everyone understood what those cars meant. This was no longer a routine review. It had become an examination. And examinations demanded answers. Marcus found me reviewing deposition notes. You've seen the news? I looked up. The executive committee has been called before the regulatory board. He placed his tablet on my desk. No anonymous sources this time. The article quoted an official spokesperson. The inquiry has entered its formal evidentiary phase. I read the sentence twice before locking my screen. Marcus leaned against the doorframe. You don't seem surprised. I'm not. You knew this was coming? I knew investigations eventually stop collecting questions and start comparing answers. Marcus smiled. That's a frightening sentence. It's also how the truth usually works. The regulatory hearing wasn't open to the public, but law firms were built on conversations, and conversations had a way of escaping closed rooms. By lunchtime, fragments had already spread across the legal district. Auditors had presented server histories, financial approval chains, billing inconsistencies, version records, internal email timelines. Not accusations. Records. No one could argue with a timestamp. No one could negotiate with metadata. Facts rarely raised their voices. They simply remained where people had left them. Across town, Victor sat alone outside the hearing room. For the first time in years, there was no confidence in the way he held himself. His tie hung slightly loose. The folder resting on his knees remained unopened. Rachel approached quietly. They're ready. He didn't move. Victor. I know. She sat beside him. They're asking everyone the same questions. He stared at the polished floor. I thought I was protecting the firm. Rachel answered honestly. No. You were protecting your career. The words landed without anger. That somehow made them heavier. Victor closed his eyes. I didn't think it would go this far. No one ever does. Inside the hearing room, Eleanor Whitmore faced a panel of investigators. The lead examiner slid several documents across the table. Ms. Whitmore, can you explain why authorship records for the Morrison Technologies litigation were modified after the court's final judgment? She adjusted her glasses. I wasn't aware they had been. The examiner nodded once. We believe you. He produced another document. However, the modifications required executive authorization. Silence. Not because Eleanor didn't understand. Because she did. Every answer narrowed the path ahead. Every omission created another contradiction. The investigation wasn't trying to trap anyone. It was simply refusing to ignore what the records already showed. That same afternoon, our office remained busy with ordinary work. Lease disputes, contract reviews, employment negotiations. Ethan looked up from his desk. Doesn't it feel strange? What does? The biggest firm in the city might be falling apart. And we're arguing over parking clauses. I smiled. People still need lawyers. He laughed. I guess they do. Harold overheard the conversation. Remember this. He looked around the room. Good firms aren't built during scandals. They're revealed by how they behave while someone else's scandal is happening. No one forgot those words. Just before closing time, the receptionist buzzed my office. Mr. Lawson? Yes. There's someone here. Name. He says you'll know why he came. Victor Hale stood in reception. Alone. No assistants. No expensive confidence. Just a tired man wearing yesterday's determination. Sophia looked toward me. I can ask him to leave. I considered it, then shook my head. Please give us the conference room. Neither of us spoke for several moments after the door closed. Victor finally broke the silence. You look well. So do you. He laughed quietly. No, I don't. I waited. He looked around the room. It's smaller than your old office. Yes. It feels lighter. It is. Victor nodded. I believe that. He rested both hands on the table. I owe you an apology. I didn't answer. Not because I rejected it. Because apologies deserved room to exist without interruption. I took credit for your work. Yes. I convinced myself it was temporary. You did. I told myself I'd make it right later. He smiled bitterly. There never was a later. Silence settled again. Finally, he asked the question that had haunted him since the investigation began. Did you report me? No. He searched my face. I believe you. You should. Then who did? I don't know. Victor looked genuinely confused. But everything started after you left. I leaned back. No. It became visible after I left. The distinction mattered. Problems didn't begin when someone noticed them. They began the moment people decided to ignore them. Victor lowered his eyes. I spent years believing success meant being indispensable. And now I think I made myself replaceable. I frowned slightly. How? I stopped becoming a lawyer. He looked around the room. I became someone who managed appearances. There was no self-pity in his voice. Only recognition. I wanted partnership so badly that I stopped asking whether I deserved it. I nodded slowly. That's an honest answer. It's probably too late. Maybe. He looked at me. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not deciding your future. No, you never were. For the first time since entering the room. Victor smiled. A tired smile, but a genuine one. You always answered questions like that. Before leaving, he stopped beside the conference room door. I heard something today. What? One of the investigators said. He hesitated. Truth doesn't destroy institutions. It reveals what was already broken. I looked out through the glass wall where our team continued working. Sophia was helping Ethan prepare tomorrow's filings. Marcus was reviewing a client's merger agreement. Harold was quietly correcting a draft with a red pen. No one had stopped working because Victor had arrived. No one gathered to celebrate his downfall. Life simply continued. That's true, I said. Victor nodded. I know. He extended his hand. This time, I shook it. Not because everything had been forgiven. Not because the damage had disappeared. But because accountability and bitterness were not the same thing. He walked away without looking back. I watched from the window as he disappeared into the evening crowd, no longer surrounded by cameras or admiration. Just another man forced to live with his own decisions. Marcus entered quietly. How did it go? He apologized. And I believed he meant it. Marcus studied me for a moment. Does that change anything? I looked toward the skyline where the lights of Whitmore and Cole were noticeably fewer than they had been only days earlier. No. The truth was never waiting for an apology. It had already arrived. And now, it belonged to everyone. Truth does not create damage. It reveals where damage already exists. Outside, the city settled into another ordinary night. Inside one law firm, the collapse had become unavoidable. Inside another, a future was quietly taking shape. The first anniversary of our firm arrived without anyone noticing. There were no balloons, no speeches, no catered lunch, only a full reception area, ringing phones, and 3 conference rooms occupied by clients who had chosen to trust us. Sophia glanced at the calendar while organizing appointments. You know what today is? Ethan looked up from his laptop. Tuesday. Harold chuckled. Close enough. Marcus stepped out of his office carrying a stack of contracts. 1 year. The room fell quiet for a moment. No one had planned to celebrate. Perhaps that was why the realization felt genuine. A year earlier, this office had echoed with the sound of unpacked boxes and uncertain optimism. Now it echoed with conversations about strategy, settlements, and people whose futures depended on our work. Growth had arrived so gradually that none of us had noticed it. I looked around the office. The walls were no longer bare. Instead of expensive artwork, framed photographs hung throughout the hallway. Not portraits of partners. Photographs of moments. Our first client. Our first courtroom victory. The day Ethan argued his first motion. Sophia receiving an award from a local legal association for community service. Harold mentoring interns around the conference table. No single picture featured me alone. That had been intentional. Institutions shouldn't revolve around one person. I had already seen where that road ended. My phone buzzed softly. Olivia Chun. I answered immediately. Good morning. You sound busy. We are. I won't keep you long. There was warmth in her voice now that hadn't existed months earlier. After the investigation, she had accepted a position with the city's Office of Public Integrity. The work suited her. She had always preferred facts over politics. I wanted to congratulate you. For what? Your firm. I smiled. You remembered the date. I remember important things. A brief silence followed. Then she said quietly, they announced it this morning. I knew exactly what she meant before she finished. Whitmore and Cole. It's official. The firm would dissolve over the next several months. Its remaining practice groups would separate into independent partnerships. The name that had dominated the city's legal community for decades would disappear. Not because regulators ordered it. Because the partners no longer trusted one another enough to rebuild. A building could survive damaged walls. It couldn't survive a broken foundation. After ending the call, I stood by my office window. I expected satisfaction. Instead, I felt something closer to grief. Marcus knocked lightly before entering. You heard. I did. He stood beside me, looking toward the skyline. I thought you'd be happier. So did I. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, I said, I spent 12 years believing that place could become what it promised to be. Marcus nodded. You weren't mourning the firm. No, I'm mourning the possibility. That afternoon, Professor Linda Zhao visited our office with a group of final-year law students. She smiled as Ethan nervously prepared the conference room. They've been looking forward to meeting you. I looked at the students. Most were ambitious. Some were intimidated. One or two clearly believed they already knew everything. I recognized that expression. I'd worn it once myself. Professor Zhao introduced me simply. This is Daniel Lawson. She didn't mention the investigation, the headlines, or Whitmore and Cole. She didn't need to. One student raised his hand almost immediately. Sir. Yes. If you hadn't been dismissed, would you still be there today? The room became completely silent. Even Professor Zhao watched carefully. It was a fair question. I answered honestly. Probably. The students exchanged glances. Another spoke. Then wasn't getting fired the best thing that ever happened to you? I smiled faintly. No. Confusion spread across several faces. The best thing that happened was finally seeing the truth clearly. I walked toward the whiteboard, then wrote 2 sentences. Success can hide a broken system. Failure can reveal the right path. You don't always control what happens to you, I continued. But you decide what you'll build afterward. No one wrote that down immediately. They simply looked at the words. Sometimes lessons needed silence before they became understanding. Later that evening, after the students had left, Ethan lingered behind. Can I ask something? Of course. Why didn't you tell them about Victor? What about him? That he apologized. I leaned against the conference table. Because this wasn't his story. Ethan frowned. But he was the villain. No. He made harmful choices. That's different. He looked thoughtful. I've been thinking about what Harold said. Which part? Errors deserve correction. Choices deserve accountability. I nodded. Victor became accountable. And the others? They're living with their choices too. He looked around the office. I think I understand now. Understanding isn't the end. It's the beginning. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. The receptionist knocked gently. Judge Morrison is here. I welcomed her into my office. She looked exactly as composed as the day she'd first visited. I came to return something. She handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a recommendation letter, not addressed to a court or a client, but to the National Council on Legal Ethics. They've invited me to nominate someone for this year's Integrity Award, she explained. I looked at the letter but didn't open it. You shouldn't have. She smiled. I already did. I shook my head. I don't need awards. No. She stood. But young lawyers need examples. Before leaving, she paused. Do you know why I chose you? Because I was right? She laughed softly. No. Because when everyone expected you to spend your energy destroying the people who wronged you, you spent it building something worth protecting. After she left, I remained seated for a long time. The letter rested unopened on my desk. Recognition had once been everything I thought I wanted. Now, it felt strangely small compared to the quiet satisfaction of hearing laughter echo through an office built on trust instead of fear. For the first time in many years, peace no longer felt temporary. It felt earned. I didn't open Judge Morrison's letter until everyone had gone home. The office was unusually still. Outside, the city shimmered beneath the glow of thousands of windows. Somewhere among them were lawyers preparing tomorrow's arguments, executives negotiating impossible deals, and families hoping someone would keep the promises made to them. I unfolded the letter carefully. It wasn't long. Judge Morrison had written only a single page. The final sentence held my attention. Integrity is not measured by how loudly a person exposes wrongdoing, but by what they choose to build after walking away from it. I folded the letter again. Awards came and went. That sentence was worth keeping. I placed it inside the top drawer of my desk. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. The following week brought our busiest Monday since opening the firm. Sophia walked through the reception area with practiced confidence, greeting clients by name before they even reached the front desk. The atmosphere had changed over the past year. People no longer arrived wondering whether we were capable. They arrived expecting that we cared. There was a difference. Marcus stepped into my office carrying a financial report. I think you'll want to see this. I scanned the figures. Revenue had grown steadily. Expenses remained healthy. No hidden liabilities. No unexplained transfers. No accounting puzzles waiting for someone else to solve. Marcus smiled. Our accountant says we're boring. Good. He actually apologized. He shouldn't. Healthy organizations rarely created exciting financial stories. That was precisely the point. Near lunchtime, Ethan knocked gently. Can you spare 10 minutes? For you? Always. He closed the door behind him. I've been offered a position. I nodded. I wondered when that would happen. He looked surprised. You knew? You're talented. Other firms noticed. He sat across from me. It's a prestigious offer. I'm sure it is. They're offering more money. I waited. They asked if I'd leave. And he smiled sheepishly. I told them I'd think about it. I leaned back in my chair. Good. He blinked. You aren't going to convince me to stay? No. Why not? Because if people feel trapped, they eventually stop caring. He stared at me. You'd really let me go? I'd thank you for everything you've contributed. Silence settled between us. Finally, Ethan laughed. That answer made my decision easier. So you're staying? For now. I smiled. That's all anyone can honestly promise. A month later, Marcus suggested something unexpected. We've been invited. Where? The annual City Bar Association dinner. I looked up from my paperwork. I haven't gone in years. I know. Why now? He placed the invitation on my desk. Because this year they're honoring firms that expanded access to legal aid. I read the card carefully. Our firm's name appeared alongside organizations much older and much larger than ours. Sophia entered as Marcus was leaving. I heard. You hear everything. She grinned. It's part of the job. Then her expression softened. You should go. I'm not interested in publicity. It isn't publicity. It's acknowledgement. I looked at the invitation again. For a long moment, I remembered another banquet years earlier. Crystal chandeliers. Perfect speeches. Victor standing at the center of applause that should never have belonged to him. The memory no longer hurt. It simply felt distant. I'll go, I said. The ballroom buzzed with conversation. Judges, professors, young attorneys, veterans of the profession. For the first time in years, I attended an event without representing someone else's reputation. Marcus quietly nudged my shoulder. Look. Across the room stood Eleanor Whitmore. Not at the head table. Not surrounded by admirers. Simply speaking with two former colleagues. She noticed me almost immediately. After a brief hesitation, she walked over. Daniel. Eleanor. It's good to see you. You too. There was no bitterness left between us. Only history. I visited the old office last week, she said quietly. They've nearly emptied it. I nodded. I heard. She smiled faintly. You know what surprised me? What? It was quieter than I remembered. I couldn't help smiling. Sometimes noise hides more than silence. She laughed. You always had a way with observations. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, I've started teaching. That genuinely surprised me. Law. Leadership. I raised an eyebrow. I tell young partners about mistakes. She looked toward the stage. I have plenty to teach. I believed her. Growth wasn't measured by never falling. It was measured by what someone became after accepting why they had. The awards ceremony was refreshingly brief. No dramatic music. No exaggerated introductions. When our firm's name was announced for its contribution to community legal services, Marcus gently nudged me toward the stage. "We built this together," I whispered. "I know. So come with me." Sophia and Harold joined us without argument. Ethan followed a second later. 5 people. 1 recognition. Exactly as it should be. The presenter handed me the plaque. I looked out across the audience. Dozens of faces. Some familiar. Some new. Many expecting a speech. I kept it short. When people think about the legal profession, they often think about winning. A few heads nodded. I've learned that the greater responsibility is making sure people still trust the law after they've lost. Silence filled the room. Not uncomfortable silence. Thoughtful silence. "We're honored. Thank you." Nothing more. As we returned to our seats, Marcus whispered, 30 seconds. I said what mattered. Later that evening, we stood outside the ballroom overlooking the river. The city lights reflected across the water, calmer than they had seemed a year ago. Sophia folded her arms. "I've been thinking. That's usually dangerous," Marcus joked. She ignored him. "If none of this had happened, we never would have met." Harold smiled. "Life has an odd sense of timing." Ethan looked toward me. "Do you ever wish you could go back?" I watched the river move steadily beneath the bridge. "No, not even for one conversation." I shook my head. If I changed the past, someone else might never find this future. No one replied. Some answers didn't need discussion. They simply needed time to settle. As we walked back toward our cars, I glanced once more at the skyline. Whitmore and Cole's name no longer illuminated the tower where I'd spent 12 years of my life. Another company had already leased part of the building. The city had moved on. So had I. I no longer measured success by recognition, or titles, or whose name appeared beneath a courtroom photograph. I measured it by something far quieter. Whether the people working beside me could go home each evening knowing they had never needed to choose between honesty and ambition. That was the firm I had wanted to build all along. And finally, it existed. Peace begins when winning stops mattering. The envelope arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. No official seal. No urgent markings. Just my name, written neatly across the front in familiar handwriting. Sophia placed it on my desk. It was delivered by courier. No return address. She shook her head. I asked. After she left, I turned the envelope over once before opening it. Inside was a single letter. No more than 2 pages. The signature at the bottom stopped me. Victor Hale. I hadn't seen him in nearly 18 months. Not since the evening he had walked out of our conference room, carrying the weight of his own decisions. There had been no further meetings. No interviews. No public statements. The investigation had eventually concluded. Regulatory sanctions had followed. Several senior executives had lost their licenses. Others had quietly retired. Some accepted responsibility. Some never did. The newspapers covered the story for a week before moving on. Cities rarely remembered scandals for long. The people who lived through them remembered much longer. I unfolded the letter. Daniel, I hope this reaches you before anyone else tells you why I'm writing. I'm leaving the city. Not because I have to. Because I think it's time. Before I go, there's one matter I've spent too long avoiding. I'd appreciate the chance to speak with you. Not to ask for anything. Not to defend myself. Only to finish a conversation we never really had. Victor. I read it twice. Then folded it carefully. Marcus knocked lightly before entering. You look thoughtful. I received a letter. Good news. Not exactly. I handed it to him. He read it silently before returning it. What will you do? I haven't decided. You don't owe him anything. I know. Marcus leaned against the bookshelf. Then why are you considering it? I looked around the office. The walls had changed since our first year. More books. More photographs. More evidence of lives quietly moving forward. I don't think this meeting is about what I owe him. What is it about? I think it's about making sure nothing remains unfinished. Marcus nodded slowly. That sounds like you. The meeting took place 3 days later. Victor chose a public park overlooking the river instead of a restaurant or office. Children played nearby. Runners passed along the riverside path. Life continued around us without recognizing either of us. Perhaps that was fitting. Victor stood as I approached. He looked older. Not dramatically. Just lighter. The kind of lightness that came only after carrying something too heavy for too long. Thank you for coming. You said you wanted to finish a conversation. I do. We sat on a bench facing the water. Neither of us rushed to speak. Finally, Victor broke the silence. I used to hate you. The honesty made me smile slightly. I know. I thought your calm meant you were mocking me. It wasn't. I understand that now. He looked toward the river. I spent months blaming everyone else. The auditors. Eleanor. The accounting department. You. He laughed quietly. I was running out of people. And then, I looked in the mirror. For a while we simply watched the water. Victor spoke again. I've accepted a position with a non-profit legal clinic. I turned toward him. They know everything. They insisted on knowing. And they still hired you. They said experience isn't wasted if someone learns from it. That sounded wiser than many corporate hiring committees. What kind of work? Housing disputes. Employment claims. People who can't afford expensive lawyers. I nodded. You'll be useful there. I hope so. He looked almost embarrassed. I don't expect redemption. Good. He glanced at me. Why? Because redemption isn't something other people hand you. It comes from what you choose next. He sat quietly after that. Perhaps because he recognized the answer before I'd spoken it. Back at the office, life moved forward exactly as it always had. Sophia was interviewing 2 new associates. Harold had begun reducing his hours but refused to retire completely. I'll stop working, he insisted. The day people stop making avoidable mistakes. Marcus laughed. So never. Probably. Ethan had become one of our most respected litigators. Not because he argued the loudest. Because judges trusted him. Trust had become contagious inside the firm. Every new employee noticed it. Every client felt it. No one wrote it into the employee handbook. Culture never fit neatly into written policies. It lived inside ordinary decisions. That Friday afternoon, Professor Zhao invited me back to the university. The graduating class had changed. The questions had not. One student raised a hand. If someone betrays you, how do you stop thinking about revenge? The room waited. I looked at the faces before me. Bright. Ambitious. Some carrying disappointments they hadn't yet spoken aloud. I answered slowly. By asking a different question. The student frowned. What question? What kind of life would make revenge unnecessary? Pens finally began moving across notebooks. I continued. If your future depends on someone else's downfall, you've given them more control than they deserve. The room remained completely silent. Not because they agreed. Because they were considering whether it might be true. As I left the university that evening, my phone buzzed. A message from Olivia. The Ethics Council approved your nomination. Congratulations. I stared at the screen for a long moment before smiling. Not because of the award. Because I remembered the man who had once believed recognition was proof of worth. He would have chased that message. Celebrated it. Displayed it proudly. Now, I simply put my phone back into my pocket and walked toward the parking lot. There was still work waiting tomorrow. Clients who needed help. Young lawyers who needed guidance. A firm that deserved my attention. The future had become wonderfully ordinary. And I had never been more grateful for that. The awards ceremony lasted less than an hour. There were no television cameras. No reporters crowding the entrance. No headlines waiting to be written. The National Council on Legal Ethics held the event inside a modest auditorium at the old courthouse, where generations of lawyers had taken their oaths. The simplicity suited it. Some achievements were diminished by spectacle. This wasn't one of them. Marcus sat beside Sophia in the 3rd row. Harold complained that the chairs were uncomfortable. Ethan quietly reminded him that he had made the exact same complaint at every event for the past 2 years. Harold smiled. Consistency is a virtue. It can also be a bad habit. The people around them laughed. I heard it from backstage. That sound, more than any award, reminded me what success had become. When my name was called, I walked to the podium without rehearsing a speech. The chairman handed me a simple glass plaque. No oversized check. No dramatic photographs. Just a firm handshake. Congratulations. Thank you. He stepped aside. The audience waited. I looked across the room. Judges. Students. Attorneys. Clerks. People at every stage of the profession. For a brief moment, I remembered another courtroom. Another audience. Another applause that had been directed toward the wrong person. The memory surfaced, then quietly disappeared. It no longer had power over me. I looked back at the audience. When I began practicing law, I said, I believed integrity was something people noticed. A few smiles appeared. I was wrong. The room grew still. Most days, No one notices integrity at all. They notice results. They notice victories. They notice headlines. I rested the plaque on the podium. But integrity isn't for the days when everyone is watching. It's for the ordinary days. The days when no one would ever know the difference. Silence settled across the auditorium. Not empty silence. The kind that meant people were listening beyond the words. I used to think success meant being recognized. I smiled. Now I think success means sleeping well enough that recognition becomes unnecessary. I stepped away from the microphone. The applause wasn't loud. It was sincere. That mattered more. After the ceremony, people slowly filtered into the courthouse courtyard. Students approached with questions. Young lawyers asked for advice. Most of the conversations weren't about investigations or scandals. They were about careers, balance, purpose. One young attorney hesitated before speaking. Mr. Lawson. Yes. I just joined a large firm. I smiled. I remember those days. I'm afraid of becoming the kind of lawyer I never wanted to be. His honesty caught me off guard. What makes you think that? I've already seen people taking credit for other people's work. The words carried me back years. Conference room 9. Unsigned accusations. A contract waiting for my signature. An elevator descending in complete silence. I looked at the young lawyer. You'll face moments where speaking is difficult. He nodded. And moments where walking away feels impossible. He nodded again. How do you know which one to choose? I answered without hesitation. Ask yourself one question. What question? When this is over, will I still respect the person making this decision? He stood quietly for several seconds, then smiled. Thank you. As he walked away, I realized no legal textbook had ever taught me that lesson. Life had. A few weeks later, Ethan knocked on my office door carrying a thin folder. I think you'll appreciate this. Inside was an application. Not for a case. Not for a partnership. For an internship. The applicant's last name caught my attention. Hale. I looked up. Any relation? Ethan nodded. Victor's niece. He recommended us. I read the cover letter carefully. There was no request for special treatment. No attempt to hide the family connection. Only a young law student explaining why she wanted to learn in an environment where people received credit for their own work. Sophia appeared in the doorway. We're interviewing her tomorrow. I closed the folder. Good. You aren't worried about appearances? I smiled. We don't judge people by someone else's choices. Sophia nodded. I was hoping you'd say that. The interview took place the following morning. She arrived early. Prepared. Nervous. Honest. When Ethan asked why she wanted to work here, her answer surprised everyone. My uncle told me this was the first place he ever understood what leadership should have looked like. No one spoke for a moment. Harold finally broke the silence. Your uncle learned that the hard way. She nodded. He says most important lessons usually are. She earned the internship. Not because of her surname. In spite of it. And perhaps because she had already decided what kind of lawyer she wanted to become. Years passed quietly. Not through dramatic leaps. But through ordinary mornings. Client meetings. Court hearings. Coffee shared before sunrise. Mentoring young associates after difficult trials. Watching Ethan become a partner. Watching Sophia expand the firm without sacrificing its values. Watching Marcus finally take a real vacation after everyone else threatened to schedule it for him. Watching Harold eventually retire. Only to return every Friday because, as he insisted, someone has to make sure you haven't started making foolish decisions. Some traditions deserved to continue. One autumn evening, long after the office had emptied, I stood alone by the window overlooking the city. The skyline had changed. New towers had risen. Old names had disappeared. Whitmore and Cole existed now only in archived court records and fading memories. Its former headquarters carried another company's logo. People entering that building each morning probably had no idea what had happened there years before. Time had done what it always did. It moved forward. I opened the top drawer of my desk. Judge Morrison's letter still rested exactly where I had placed it. Beneath it lay the fountain pen I had used to sign my dismissal agreement. I picked it up. The ink had long since dried. Most people would have remembered that pen as the instrument that ended my career. They would have been wrong. It had ended one chapter. Nothing more. I set it back inside the drawer and closed it gently. Behind me, the office lights reflected against the glass. Not a monument to revenge. Not proof that I had defeated anyone. Simply evidence that something honest had survived. I switched off the final light. As I locked the office door, I understood something that had taken me years to learn. Victor hadn't destroyed my future. Eleanor hadn't taken my career. The courtroom victory had never been the greatest thing I had built. The greatest thing I had built was the life that existed after I stopped needing other people to recognize my worth. The hallway fell quiet behind me. I stepped into the night, not as the lawyer who had been betrayed, not as the man who had been vindicated, simply as someone who had finally learned that the strongest victories rarely looked like victories at all. They looked like peace. The measure of a life is not how many battles you win, but whether the person you become is someone worth living with. I smiled to myself, then walked home.